Okay, everyone, welcome back. I'm Erica Zeal, creator of Nocta Fitness, and with me today I have Suzanne Hoval, creator of Maternity, and she is a women's health physical therapist. Hey,
Hi.
Suzanne. Thanks for
Hi.
joining me. This time we'll get it
Thanks for
going.
inviting.
So I want to talk about posture and how it affects our proper core function. This is something that has been coming up a lot lately, and I feel like I've been talking about it a lot. And so Suzanne does the same as well. And I was like, well, let's have a conversation about it. Let's answer your questions. Let's let's open this whole new world and viewpoint to people about how our posture really affects our core and our proper movement and everything. So, Suzanne, as I say that, I'd love to ask you kind of like, what are the top things that you see, especially with the moms that you work with when they're pregnant specifically? Let's start there. Let's start with pregnancy.
Okay. So with pregnancy, I would say moms come in with that typical prenatal posture, right? Big old arch in the back, or what we call lordosis. Chest and pec area starts to get really tight. As the breast size changes and increases, the head goes forward. And then at the feet, with weight gain, we see that there's a lot of changes there as well, that we don't have that nice solid foundation, or what we call a strong foot. So structurally, before we even start exercising, we'll take a look at those things as far as alignment and posture. And before we get someone on a strengthening program, we'll start to address, again, alignment, posture, what's happening at the foot and ankle, what's happening at the pelvis and the low back, and then head, neck, and shoulder area. And almost always, unless someone comes in and they've already worked with someone, or they happen to be a yoga or Pilates instructor or in the industry, they need some cueing and some guidance on that area. What I see a lot of times is people will show me the exercises that they're doing, and when they demonstrate them, oh, I'm doing this at home, but I'm still having back pain, or someone showed me how to do this, or I saw this online. And when they demonstrate the exercise, they're a lot of times showing that exercise in a really bad posture. So we kind of have to clean it up, or say, let's go ahead. That's a great exercise. Let's go ahead and take a break from that. And let me fix, again, your foundation, your posture, how you're presenting. And then let's go ahead and try that exercise again. But I would say the biggest thing, as far as if we're just talking about prenatal right now, the biggest postural thing is usually what we would say lumbo-pelvic, right? That low back or pelvic placement. Maybe being the most important, because that's where, we see the most change. And that would be one of the biggest complaints during pregnancy, would be that low back pain, or all the stuff that kind of happens around that area. And that, I would say, is the biggest one as far as prenatal posturing. Let's take a look at pelvic placement and neutral spine. And does that pregnant woman know that she's still in control of pelvic placement? You just kind of fall forward and you kind of fall into that pregnancy pose, and they forget that they still have control over that area.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, some great things that you pointed out. So I want to cue to this word, the foundation. I've been saying that a lot. I've been using that a lot, and I'm working on a new program I'm creating. And I find that coming back to that word, like, it's so important, working on our foundation. I mean, it's just like our house, right? If our foundation, it might look good on the outside or everything, but if the foundation isn't solid, then maybe not right away, but eventually down the road, you're going to start to feel the aches and pains, and you're going to feel the effects of not having a really solid foundation, which starts at alignment. The other thing is pelvis. That's where I'm going with that. Is I'm finding more and more, like, working with, not just the prenatal, but with, a wide variety of clientele, but specifically pregnancy. I feel like it really messes up pelvic placement for women, and it's hard even for women to understand, because one, there's just not as much education out there as there really needs to be, of like what neutral pelvic positioning is and what that should feel like, and how that can actually be a little bit different for, you know, everybody, right? Because everybody's pelvis, everybody's spinal, you know, spine is shaped a little bit differently. No one has a perfectly straight spine. So what their pelvis looks like may be slightly different. Do you have some, I don't know, I guess I'd love to open up a little conversation about that kind of optimal, you know, posture. Like obviously we're striving for optimal posture, but we never want to force anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you have any additions to that, but that's something I always encourage, is that even if you can't, you know, we're working on building this foundation, and it depends on how long, you know, that foundation's kind of been offset, as to, you know, that it can take a while to not only create new habits for your body, right, but to then rebalance the muscles. And we can do so much of that through movement. And I think people kind of get so fixated sometimes on, oh, I feel tight here, oh, this feels really good for my body, and that may or may not always be what our body needs. We need to work on strengthening with release. And then Suzanne, what about like foam rolling release techniques? Are you a big fan of doing, you know, including foam rolling and things like that?
For sure, especially with the postpartum population. If it's a prenatal client, I'll use the soft foam roller, because I think with the prenatal population, I'm not a big fan of using the hard styrofoam, get in there and kind of knead it out as aggressively as possible. So I'll just kind of take a step back, use the soft foam roller, kind of hit the piriformis, do a little bit of IT band rolling. For the postpartum population, I'm a little conservative, so we'll usually start with the soft foam roller as well. But when I'm teaching a postpartum class, every class that I teach, we start with breathing, foam roller, pelvic placement. And again, it's almost like, it's kind of like the missing piece, right? I feel like people are kind of fixated on the belly right now, and everybody wants to get their body back, and that always is, you know, what does my belly look like? But they're missing the important step. And the conversation that I usually have with my gals after pregnancy, and if they're seeing me prenatal, we start to have it in the 3rd trimester. But, you know, don't get frustrated by the process if, you know, we don't jump back into things as fast as you would have thought we were going to jump into things. Because trust me on this, I've been doing this long enough to know that if you don't lay the foundation properly, if you don't do the basics, or what we call in Pilates, the principles, in physical therapy, right? The foundation, whatever you call it, it's the base work that you have to do before you kind of put the building blocks on top. Or you will hit that 6-month mark, you will hit that 12-month mark, and you just won't be satisfied with the outcome. You'll come in at 12 months postpartum, and we'll still kind of be addressing some of those concerns that maybe we could have chipped away at early on if we did the foundation work. So with my classes, we always do foam roller, we always do breath work, we always do pelvic placement, and every class starts that way. And for women who maybe haven't had access to a really great class, or a body worker, or an instructor, or a physical therapist, maybe they don't live in a place where it's super accessible, or they have, you know, 3 or 4 kids and a little one, they're not able to get out of the house, so they're guiding themselves at home and they're doing their own workout. So they don't have that advantage of having someone with them, that, you know, they have someone's eyeballs or someone's hands to reposition them. I think the foam roller is a really good tool, because, you know, say we get on the foam roller and we lay down bottom to spine, and our whole spine is supported on there, and we just go in for a pec stretch or some arm circles. You're not really doing that wrong, right? We could probably perfect you. We'd probably, you know, fix that rib position, or kind of, you know, tweak the pelvis a little bit, but everybody kind of looks good on that foam roller, or better than they did with stuff or positions they might have been getting into throughout the day. Huge fan of the foam roller, and almost every gal who comes to our studio gets a foam roller for home use. It's an easy tool. It's, you know, when women get on it, it's like, oh, you're addressing posture right there. By just getting on the foam roller once a day, every other day, you can give yourself a little green check, because you've done something to realign, to get back into neutral position. And then of course we can always build on that, but that's just a basic thing that moms can do. You know, if a mom got on a foam roller and just laid on the foam roller lengthwise, did a little bit of pec stretching, maybe did a little bit of pelvic placement or pelvic tilts on there, and then flipped over and did some rolling on her IT band, I would give her a green check for the day that she's done something for alignment and posture. And she should be chipping away at, like you said, some of those aches and pains that could creep in if we don't do that good foundation work. Really easy way to just tackle it if you are a mom who is at home on her own, guiding her own program.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, those are amazing, amazing tips. And I love the foam roller. It's one of the first places I start with clients, just like that, because you can do it at home. You can do it anywhere. You can travel with it. If I've got a client that I know is traveling, I'm like, here, you know, even you can get the little ones now, you know, and I have my trigger point one, which I like. And I mean, I don't know, do you think the trigger point one is, I mean, it's fairly intense, but it's not the, you know, the hardest ones. Do you find that to be a little too strong for pregnancy? Do you use a soft, you use like the squishy soft rollers?
I use the squishy soft one, yeah. And it's usually enough because if you think about it, with the increased weight gain, you're kind of putting a little bit of extra weight into your rolling. So unless someone just really has to use that styrofoam, the harder one, I almost always turn to the soft one. And usually my clients fall in love with it too. Once they, you know, pregnancy is really demanding on the body. So it's kind of nice that you're doing the foam rolling, you're doing, you know, some soft tissue release, you're doing some postural work, but it also feels a little therapeutic. And the soft one I find is the most therapeutic. So I think women tend to like that balance of, I'm doing something, you know, that I know is restorative, but it also kind of feels soft and nice and cushy. I'm a fan of the cushy one for prenatal.
Yeah, I like that. I do some stuff with that as well. And I always just love your take on that because some people want to really like it's. Some people have this mindset of like, if they don't feel it, it's not doing anything. And like, I'll do some, and this is, I think, with prenatal, and again, right in that postpartum phase, with maybe women that have diastasis and they're afraid of, you know, putting too much stress on their abs. So maybe it's hard to get into that quad stretch and, you know, in kind of that planking position, like doing stuff against a wall where you're pressing up against the wall. And I get clients that I'm like, okay, you might not really feel like you're doing a lot, but you really are. Because even the simplest things, and I'm starting to do so much more with stimulating fascia and connective tissue. And I know I feel like don't even understand what that is. They're like, just have to trust me, go with it, you know. And so then when they're done doing it and they're like, oh yeah, I feel the difference. I feel a little taller. I feel a little more open. So I feel like with the pre and postpartum population, I know you 100% agree with me because you just mentioned about the, you know, doing something that is good for your body, but also therapeutic. So kind of getting that message across that, hey, your exercises do not have to be hard and intense to be super effective. Sometimes that's actually the most effective, especially when we are building the foundational work, is that sometimes we gotta take a couple steps back, work on, you know, like you've talked about with the pelvic alignment, focus on our breath. If we get a little too stressed, our breath really starts to become inhibited and we stop breathing deeply. And so that's something that I really try to stress to clients and moms. And it's like, you have to, we can release so much stress just through our breath. So we spend so much time driving nowadays. I don't know about you, running kids everywhere. And so I wanted to share this tip is that I get a lot of women that are like, you know, they drive too much and they start to complain about their hips or their back. And I'm like, well, use driving, like when you're sitting, you can do this obviously seated in a chair too, but like when you're driving, really trying to sit up tall and wiggle kind of your sits bones, your butt bones kind of underneath you to get you up, right? Because we tend to really tuck the pelvis.
Right.
And Suzanne, I want to talk a little about this and how related to core function in just a second. But when you're, you know, driving and if you think about pulling those sits bones back and sitting tall, and I've been cueing a lot of lengthening through the top of your head, and hopefully you start to feel how that fires your core and it can help take some stress off your low back and your SI joint when you got, you know, especially during pregnancy, you tend to get a lot of compression around your sacrum. And so just, again, focusing on posture can help with that. But then when you're holding this nice tall posture, we can focus on breath. And then that breath can correlate into core function and yada, yada, yada. These are all like, you know, the foundation principles. So let's revisit. I want to talk a little bit more about the tucked, the tucked pelvis and the belly to spine. I've been really breaking client after client of that habit. The first time they come in and they tuck their butt because they're squeezing them so tight and they're drawing their belly to their spine. And then I point out some cueing to them and they're like, oh, wow. I was like, you're actually restricting your breath, right? When you're doing that.
Yeah. And I think it's so easy to just kind of tuck, and it's like, if we're just talking right now about sitting posture, it's so easy to fall into that tucked position because of weakness, right? So if we're not strong, it's really hard to maintain a good, neutral, upright, lengthened position. So if we have a little bit of weakness, we're going to cave into that tucked position. And then the other reason I think a lot of moms are falling into that tucked position is because when you go into that upright, lengthened position, you don't have that sucked in belly that unfortunately everybody's kind of looking for right now. Like, it's easier to hide the tummy when you roll back and pull it in. But, you're not really hiding the tummy. You're just in a faulty position, right?
Yeah.
So when women come up and they're neutral and they aren't able to engage as well there, so they're not able to turn what we call the glue on, or that inner unit, they get a little self-conscious of their tummy because it's a foreign position for them. And they go forward and now they can't engage. But that's where they need to practice, right? Women kind of shy away early postpartum because they already feel, and this is a kind of a term of endearment that we use in our Pilates studio, but rectus pufus, right? When you go into that neutral posture and maybe you're early postpartum, you feel like you get that rectus pufus, like things are pooching out a little bit because you're not familiar with engaging in that position. But it means you need to practice there. So women tend to kind of shy away from that tuck back and suck it back in to, again, hide it. So I think it's a weakness thing, and it's also kind of shying away from that position where they don't feel like they have good strength in their inner unit. It's a huge thing that women need to practice, to get up on the sit bones, to find length, and then realize that, yeah, that position is really difficult, but that shows where your weaknesses are. And that if you learn to engage in that position, you're going to be a lot more happy with the look and feel and function of your tummy, because you're going to learn to engage there. But I think women are really lacking in that area. I think for the postpartum population, I'll usually have them practice in supine or lying down on the floor first, because that's the easiest step one position. And they don't feel as self-conscious about how their tummy looks when they're initially in neutral and they're not as strong there. So we'll get into a supine position. We'll play around with pelvic placement. We'll go neutral, and then I'll teach them how to engage there. And then the education process starts there as, okay, now we're going to take this to a more upright position. We're going to take this to sitting. We're going to take this to tall kneeling. We're going to take this to standing. And it gets a little bit trickier there. But I think women feel comfortable practicing in supine first, or practicing in the lying down position, so that they realize, again, they have control over where their pelvis is going to be. And then let's learn how to engage that inner corset so you're comfortable with holding that position. And it's definitely a learning process. Even my strongest client, who's a triathlete, who's has that really strong outer shell, will lose some of that inner recruitment during pregnancy. Women sometimes are afraid to say that they got weak during pregnancy. Certain muscles are going to get weak during pregnancy, even if you've done everything right. And there is a rebuilding process that needs to happen postpartum. But like I said, pelvic placement, inner unit, starting in the lying down position and then taking it to more upright positions, and realizing that practice makes permanent. The more you practice, the more you're going to be able to maintain. When I say permanent, I use that loosely, because all of us will fall into faulty positions throughout the day, but you don't want to live in that faulty position. You don't want that to be, where you function. You want to really live in that more upright, lengthened, turned on in your inner unit position.
Yes, I love that. Absolutely. And that's the thing with posture that I feel like, especially as a busy mom, and it's so hard some days to even think about maybe getting your 10, 20, 30 minutes of exercising in, but posture and focusing on your neutral alignment is something that you can do all the time. You don't have to stop and create like a workout for it. You can, it's awareness. And that's one thing that I like to talk about is it's that awareness. And so maybe when you're down on the ground playing with your little one, you know, get down there with them and do, like you said, you know, practice. Like for me, it would be like a pelvic, practicing pelvic tilts, hip rolls. But again, I teach that, and I know you do the same, of really getting them to stimulate the movement from the pelvic floor, the transverse, you know, and practicing the breath with that versus just, because I find, and again, I know you do the same with physical therapy, that the hips get so tight and essentially like locked up. And pregnancy really, I mean, well, it doesn't even take pregnancy to do it. It takes a lot of, you know, when we sit a lot. I mean, I even noticed it myself. I tend to not sit when either I'm training or if I am doing desk work, I have a desk where I can stand up. And for that reason, because sitting, I mean, after having 3 kids, my hips don't love to sit. They
Right.
just flat out don't. And so I'm like, I can imagine what my body would feel like if I didn't really work on my posture constantly and I didn't incorporate these, you know, things that I do, and then I also, that we teach, right? And so those that sit a lot, the hips get so tight, and then that makes it even harder to find the optimal core functioning. Again, so back to the foam rolling, working to release, you know, the quads and up and towards the hip and things like that. The simplest little things can really help to give your body more movement. And so what I find is that we tend to get really tight in the glutes, and that's kind of that whole like butt tucking, belly to spine, is that for some women, I should say not just women, but a lot of people in general, in order to find core recruitment, sometimes they tend to want to just grip in the glutes. And when you bring awareness to it, and they actually start to practice like relaxing in the glutes, and then we can take it further into the pelvic floor and the deep core muscles, then you can help to find recruitment a lot easier that way, because we are so tight and stressed.
Right.
And stress, I don't know, what do you think, Suzanne? I always feel like when I get a client that comes to me and they're really tight in their hips, that I'm like, you know, how's life? Like, how's your stress level and things like that? Do you find there's a correlation between stress and tight hips as well?
I think so, but I think it's pretty universal. I think the majority of folks who come in who aren't already addressing it are tight in the hips because of, like you said before, lifestyles, sitting, driving, you know, working at the computer, having recently gone through a pregnancy, whatever the lifestyle issue is. I think it's pretty universal that the majority of people coming in need that release, stretching, breathing, almost kind of that first 10 minutes of working on lengthening, flexibility, breathing before you even start the strengthening or the stability work, right? I think it's a balance, and I feel like there's a push right now that everyone's working on strengthening, but again, the missed pieces are the release, the flexibility, the breathing, and then exactly what we're talking about today. Posture, pelvic placement, and sometimes you can get tighter if those things are not in a good place, right? So I think, like I said, regardless, I haven't had someone come in recently that was really relaxed and had great flexibility and all they needed to work on was strength and stability. Like, oh wow, you're breathing in all the right places and your flexibility is great. Let's get on the reformer and just go right to strengthening. I think the majority of people need the release, need the flexibility.
Yeah. And the one thing, just for people that have never really done Pilates or reformer, if you ever get a chance to do it, I love it because you're always working on lengthening through a movement, which is kind of where I think I fell in love with it, is that I tended to be a really tight person, just I think genetically. And so over the years, like I'm more flexible now than I was at the age of 16. That's crazy to think that. And I don't strive to be super flexible. It's just for proper movement. And so in time, and that's the other thing, and I feel like we get so quick to want results sometimes too, that we have to remind ourselves and be reminded, and this is something that I try to put out there, you know, a decent amount, is that we need to be kind to our bodies, and it's all about the little steps, the baby steps that we do. And one thing I want to be sure I talked about, because I got this question when I posted this on Instagram the other day, and I actually get this question a lot, is about, the recovery after in the postpartum phase, because the diastasis and, the abdominal separation, pelvic floor weakness, and just everything that can go along and be exacerbated by pregnancy. And again, there's things, you can do during pregnancy to obviously help improve posture or improve your core connection through pregnancy just by posture, right? Because when you have that good optimal posture as often as you can, your core muscles, they just have to fire. Otherwise, you couldn't hold that good posture. That's why. Because if you notice it, and sometimes I teach it where, like, if you go into a bad posture and then you work at lengthening, you can then kind of feel, oh, wow, that feels totally different. And yeah, you might fatigue quickly holding it, using, your muscles, but that's something to strive towards working to. So it's baby steps, little things to work on along the way. But in that postpartum, because I get so many women that are like, how soon can I start? What can I do? And I think this is where, a lot of women get excited to just get right back into their workouts, whatever it was, whether it's like the CrossFit, the boot camp type stuff. And not that that's bad, but it's not optimal in the beginning. It's this foundational work. And so I just want to make sure that we talk about that, because I want to bring more awareness to that right after in that postpartum phase. Again, something to talk with your doctor, obviously, to make sure that they approve you for exercise. But remember, if you're not working out for those 6-ish weeks in the postpartum phase, you can lose a lot of strength. So again, work some of this foundational work. I wouldn't call it exercise. I would call it good postural alignment, starting to, stimulate your core to function a little bit, but it's nothing that's going to stress the body. But that's exactly where you need to start postpartum. Again, always talk with your doctor, right? But from there, we have to work on these foundational exercises and start to find that deep core, that pelvic floor, and that transverse or lower belly. I say sometimes, because I know a lot of people don't really understand what the transverse abdominals are. We need to start to at least be working towards firing in those muscles before we start to think that, oh, we're just going to go, run crazy and do crazy intense boot camp. If we can't properly connect our core and stimulate through our torso and hold our body in somewhat of at least a decent posture day to day, then going and adding that intense exercise on top is actually can be, cause more harm than good. Right. And we haven't even talked about, like, prolapse and stuff like that. And, I'm not an expert in that, but I know that it can happen. And I know that it can happen because you stress your body, your core too soon, and it's just not ready. So it's, baby steps, focusing on that foundation. And like what I teach, I try to really cue visually. And, some people get excited. They just want to go in and do their workouts and be done. But when you take a step back and are really more aware of what's going on within your body, and you take that, I'm just going to work hard to burn calories, because that only does so much for your body. We need to rework at realigning our body, and that starts from our core, and then it goes hand in hand, right? So I don't know if you have any more to add to that, Suzanne.
Yeah, I think for sure, step one always has to be restore, rehab, recover before you get into the general exercise. And it's such an individual thing. It depends on kind of what you brought into your pregnancy. If you've had a history of, past surgery or past injury, or you came into pregnancy feeling great and strong, and you were able to maintain a nice, fit and active pregnancy. And then that's kind of where you're starting postpartum. So everybody's starting a little bit different, but regardless, if I have someone who's been on bed rest and is completely deconditioned because they weren't able to benefit from an active pregnancy, and then someone who had a relatively uneventful pregnancy and they're, feeling really good, and at 2 to 3 weeks, they just want to go. Regardless, they both have individual needs, and they're going to move at a different pace, but they're both going to start with the foundation work. They're both going to start with the restorative care, because a body that's been through pregnancy, whether it's been a sedentary pregnancy or a fit pregnancy, has undergone changes that need some attention and some TLC. And I think for me, you know, it's just an education thing. When women come in, I let them know some of the changes that have happened. I show them, you know, when you go through a hip flexor stretch, they probably feel how tight they are in those hip flexors. So they can now appreciate it because you've verbally educated them. Now you've showed them on their own body, and then you show them a way to address it. And then the next thing that I'll do to kind of get them on board with that restorative care is to give them a basic exercise, whether it be, I know something we're both familiar, like a bent knee fallout, right? Where you just simply have them, you know, get into a neutral position, fix the rib cage. And now let's see if you can just move there in the most basic way. Let that knee fall off to the side. And were you able to stabilize your pelvis? Did you feel like your inner recruitment, your deep core muscles were able to fire properly there? And when you challenge them like that and they feel like, wow, that's like a level 1 restorative care exercise and I wasn't that good at it, then they kind of get it, like maybe I'm not ready to put weight over my head. Maybe I'm not ready for heavy level resistance if I can't stabilize my pelvis or engage my pelvic floor as I go to do these most gentle movements. And, you know, education is always part of that. Women think that, you know, at 6 months postpartum, I am really, you know, going for it. I'm doing the heavy weights. I'm back to my boot camp and I'm fine. I don't feel anything's wrong with me. So I think I'm okay to just keep pushing it without the restorative care. I always educate my clients and my patients that just because you don't feel it now at 4 to 6 months postpartum doesn't mean that you're not affecting your body and female health in a way that you probably don't want to be affecting it, as far as prolapse and different issues where you're just kind of putting too much pressure on your body that doesn't have enough support quite yet. And so I have worked with urogynecological surgeons and people who see the aftermath. And sometimes it's not, you're not going to see the effects of it immediately. You're not going to see the effects, you know, at 6 months postpartum, but sometimes they will come back in the later years of women's health issues, because women's health issues are not just prenatal and postpartum, but you know, sometimes in your late 40s or your early 50s, women start to get that falling out feeling, and you start to trace it back to 3 pregnancies that didn't have enough restorative care and that didn't build the foundation. Because, you know, if you really think about it, the pelvic floor is the soft tissue on the bottom, right? If that's what's, you know, housing, that's what's housing everything from the bottom, you really want to build that up before you start to do anything intense. And if you skip that phase, it always comes back, whether it's somebody at, you know, a year and a half postpartum that starts to train for a 5K, 10K, half marathon, and then they start to feel pressure or they start to feel some incontinence again, you know, 18 months postpartum, whether it's somebody in their late 40s who, you know, got on the trampoline for the first time and is starting to feel kind of a weird pressure, or someone in their 50s, who's feeling like something's just not right, and they're again seeking out the resources of someone like a urogynecological surgeon. You know, when they trace your history back, they're going to ask you about, you know, pregnancies and how many pregnancies and what type of deliveries. What they should be asking also is, what kind of recovery did you have? So I always caution women that way, that I get it. I'm a fit mom. You know, the reason I'm looking a little glistening is because I just got back from the gym and I just got off of the elliptical and I needed to do that intense cardio. So I get it. I get the need to want to resume those activities for various reasons, including mental health, right? We kind of need it. But I always throw that education in there, that skipped step of restorative, rehabilitative recovery always comes back as part of your women's health history of, you know, what steps you're going to take and what the building blocks are going to look like. And if symptoms of something are going to creep in, that work that you do that is the restorative phase will always benefit you. albeit it might be a little bit boring in the beginning. Find an instructor that makes it not boring. Find a program that, you know, is, because it could get a little dry. It could, when you're craving the other stuff, you could be feeling like, oh, I just want to get moving already. Gentle stuff doesn't have to be boring. Again, you want to find a good program that engages you, that keeps you interested. But my biggest take-home message would be, don't skip that restorative phase, because that work is always going to benefit you. And it's probably the most important work that you'll do in the prenatal postpartum period. So I would consider, you know, everything in pregnancy, the prenatal, and postpartum could be anywhere from 2 to 3 years out. That early foundation restorative care is the most, in my opinion, the most important work that you're going to do.
I could not agree more. Yes, yes, yes. Because we get, and again, like you said, it can get boring, I guess, to say, to do that foundational, more, you know, re-strengthening. But when you don't just think of it as a movement, but you think of it as, okay, how is this, what is this doing for my body right now? What am I feeling? And that's a takeaway, and that I really want to leave moms with, again. So whether you're pregnant now, or, you know, you're way postpartum, and I also get that too, like, it's never too late to come back and work on that restorative, but the sooner you can do it, obviously the better off you're going to be just for the rest of your life, because you're learning those tools to help you with better posture, with better core connection. And then you take those foundational principles and you apply them to your more intense exercises, your running, your weight training, your, you know, whatever it is. But if we miss that foundation and we skip right over it, then again, you're more likely to just be working kind of those same muscles all the time. And when we take a step back, and I talk about it as being like just more body awareness to ourselves, and hopefully through, you know, pregnancy, a lot of women, I feel like, become more aware of their body. So take that a step further, and let's really dive in deeper in that postpartum phase and beyond. And you will be really thankful. I mean, I've never had a mom say, oh, I wish I hadn't done that.
Right.
Right? They're so grateful, because what it does is it, yes, the initial time, couple times of doing it, be like, oh, this is kind of boring, that looks too easy. But when you take a step back and you're like, okay, what is actually happening in my body? And I would like to, I'd like to say guarantee, but I obviously can't guarantee anything. But when we're working that rehabilitative stage and finding those deep core muscles, it can really help with repairing abdominal separation. So I know a lot of women I get the extremes of people that just want to dive in and they don't even know they have separation, and they end up doing stuff that is not conducive to healing and potentially actually causing more injury, because they didn't stop to kind of, you know, back up a little bit and be like, okay, I actually need to really find what my deep core is and how I connect. And that's the foundation of really starting to draw that gap together. You know, it's not just not doing something, but what can we do to start doing? And then we work ourselves back up, right? But the other thing with that is, with the body awareness, is once you learn, because most people really never stop to think about, you know, unless you're in the fitness profession, in Pilates and teaching yoga, where we are a lot more mind body conscious. Once you learn that, you never forget it. So it's literally such a valuable skill that, again, it may not come easy for you. And I work with a lot of women, and myself too, where we have to sometimes just, like, you know, kind of clear our mind and shut off the computer and get away from our phone and be like, okay, I'm going to do this for me. And again, we get so fixated on it. We have 20, 30 minutes to dive in and work out, and we're going to just kill it and burn as many calories as we can. But when you could take a step back and spend maybe even the first 10 minutes of that 30 minutes doing easier, more gentle exercises, and I know Suzanne and I both post stuff on social media and online, we talk more about it. I feel like we could talk all day about this, and we're getting off on the whole pelvic floor thing. Suzanne, we'll have to come back and talk about that later.
For sure.
Because that's a whole different topic. But I mean, well, not yes and no, but I'm like, we could talk about it for a long time. But I just really want to, you know, get that message out that there is so much that we can do to work on strengthening our core. And a lot of that starts with the posture. And so, you know, don't be afraid to kind of go out of your comfort zone and work on your breathing and working on your posture. And I always say, like, you know, set an alarm, put a sticky note, tell whoever sees you a lot, say, hey, bug me when you see me slouching, or, stuff like that. Because it takes that constant reminder. It doesn't happen overnight, because we also didn't create those habits overnight, so we have to remember that. So slow and steady wins the race. But yeah, take a couple steps back sometimes, focusing on what you're feeling within your body. And you'll feel such a difference. And again, you can do that when you're pregnant, when you're postpartum. And once, some women are gonna hate that I say this, but once you are postpartum, you're always postpartum. I get moms that think, oh, I'm like 6 or 9 months postpartum, kind of like you were saying. Once women get to 6 months, they're like, okay, now I can just full speed ahead and go. But again, it depends on what level, where you were at. And even once you're ready to increase your exercise, it's still important to occasionally include those more simplistic exercises, just to kind of refresh you, make sure you are still making that good connection, and then you can build from there. But once you're postpartum, you're always postpartum. So when when I talk to women sometimes that just had a baby, and then we start talking about things, and they're like, oh, my mom, and I'm like, yeah, your mom could be doing this with you, right?
Right.
So Suzanne, do you have anything else that you feel like we should cover? I feel like we covered a lot, and I feel like we could keep talking, but maybe we'll end it here. And if you have anything else you want to add in closing.
I think, yeah, posture is always going to be great work. It's a great thing to do. In our eyes, it's a necessary step to take following pregnancy. You will keep revisiting it at different phases. Like you said, postpartum is forever. And it's always a good idea to find a program or find somebody to guide you if you're a little unsure about how to take steps towards better posture and better alignment. And then as far as, motivation, like you said, I tell my clients, keep the foam roller in your living room so that it's staring at you and it's right there. So, when you go to click the TV on or the news on in the evening or junk TV, your foam roller's right there, and you'll probably be more likely to pull it out and get on the foam roller. So keep a prop, whether it be a yoga ball or a foam roller, where you can see it in your home, so you're more likely to practice it, right? Practice makes permanent.
Absolutely.
And don't skip that step. Keep a prop, within your visual field, so it's your reminder to do your postural homework. And if you're a little unsure about postural work, find a program or find a professional who can kind of guide you in those steps.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. I'm so happy that we're able to hop on and have this conversation, and we'll just keep it going. I know I want to. There's so much more, like just talking. I'm like, oh, let's talk about all these topics and break them down. So if you have questions, please post them, because again, I feel like between the two of us, and I want to get more even involved, talking a lot more about this, because I am finding that women don't know, like they're more than I even was aware of, that unless obviously when I see them and when you see them, right, we educate. But for those that don't have access to, a fitness professional or physical therapist, so we're going to just keep this rolling. So if you have questions, please post them. And Suzanne, I'm going to put this out there. So if any of you pregnant women need a belly band, check hers out. So, sometimes you need a little extra support when we're pregnant.
That's right. Your posture garment.
Exactly. And it can help remind you to stand taller, right? Yeah, absolutely.
It is. It's like a little tactile reminder, and we can all, whether it's a prop or an instructor or something that is tactile like that, we all, even Pilates instructors and physical therapists, we all need those reminders throughout the day to get more upright.
Absolutely. I love it. So check her out at, sorry.
I'll do it. Bow Bay Maternity.
There you go. Okay, and we'll have all the links and everything. I'll post them below the video and on the blog post. So knockedupfitness.com, and we've got lots of information for you. So I'll see you next time.